Tonight on The ReidOut.
Now I'm going to give you the best free legal advice you're ever getting in your life. Get a great effing criminal defense lawyer. You're going to need it.
Those words from Trump lawyer Eric Hirschhorn were directed at John Eastman. But after yesterday's explosive testimony, that advice would equally well apply to Donald Trump. But first, we begin tonight with breaking news from the January 6th committee. Former White House counsel Pat Cipollone has been subpoenaed. He'd previously refused to cooperate, and it cannot come at a more critical time. With new legal exposure for the twice impeached former president, after former aide to Mark Meadows, Cassidy Hutchinson, provided what certainly looks like a smoking gun to support multiple possible criminal charges against Trump, starting with perhaps the most damning aspect of her testimony, as Hutchinson exposed in the clearest detail yet that the former president was aware of the threat of violence from his supporters on January 6th.
I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here.
That testimony is especially damning in light of the former president's speech at the Ellipse that day to his armed followers.
Fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
In fact, that kind of fight like hell, fight language was precisely what the former president's lawyers said would be foolish to include.
Both Mr. Hirschman and White House counsel's office were urging the speechwriters to not include that language for legal concerns and also for the optics of what it could portray the president wanting to do that day.
Hutchinson offered ample references to explicit criminality while recounting conversations with the then White House counsel, the aforementioned Pat Cipollone, and specific crimes that he was worried about in the lead up to the 6th, involving a plan for the former president to march to the Capitol with his followers.
Pat was concerned it would look like we were obstructing justice or obstructing the Electoral College count. He was also worried that it would look like we were inciting a riot or encouraging a riot to erupt on the Capitol, at the Capitol.
In fact, Hutchinson added that Cipollone said this just before they left for the Ellipse.
Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
Of course, thus far, Cipollone had refused to cooperate with the committee. Another figure with questions to answer is also refusing to testify, at least for now, Ginny Thomas. An attorney representing her said in a letter to the committee that it needs to provide, quote, better justification for Thomas to provide testimony. That attorney claims that Thomas's correspondence with coup memo lawyer John Eastman, a former clerk to her husband, Justice Clarence Thomas, provides no basis for an interview. Joining me now, Peter Strzok, former FBI counterintelligence agent, Nick Ackerman, former assistant special Watergate prosecutor, and Paul Butler, Georgetown law professor and former federal prosecutor. I'm going to go in reverse order and start with you, Paul. The significance, in your view, of the subpoena of Pat Cipollone. I'm going to read a little bit of this release here that says the Select Committee investigation has revealed evidence that Mr. Cipollone repeatedly raised legal and other concerns about President Trump's activities on January 6th and in the days that preceded. While the Select Committee appreciates Mr. Cipollone's earlier informal engagement with our investigation, the committee needs to hear from him on the record, as other former White House counsels have done in other congressional investigations. Any concerns Mr. Cipollone has about the institutional prerogatives of the office he previously held are clearly outweighed by the need for his testimony. Your thoughts on this subpoena, Paul, given all of the things that he was concerned about, from the speech to walking to the Capitol? He said they could be charged with every crime imaginable.
So, Joy, the House panel had to subpoena Pat Cipollone, but it's probably not going to work. With a House investigation, he will do the Trump thing of trying to beat the clock, and he will probably be able to stall by making bogus objections until the midterm elections, when the panel is likely to get neutralized or co-opted by Republicans. But the feds can still hold Cipollone accountable. The FBI should have a nice sit down with him, or he needs to be hauled into a federal grand jury. He needs to be required to answer on the record why on January 3rd he told Trump he would face serious legal problems if he went to the rally, if he went to the Capitol. Cipollone is the connection between the way that Trump incited the mob and the criminal legal theories that Trump had about alternate electors. But so far, Cipollone is acting like a coward, not a patriot.
You know, or Nick Ackerman, the other way of thinking about this, and there's been a little bit of this sort of scuttlebutt out there, that people like Cipollone who want to still appear to be loyal to Donald Trump want to be subpoenaed. Because then, like the documentary filmmaker who wants all his future documentary subjects to not think that he, you know, will snitch on them after filming them and then somehow be testified, you know, he probably wanted it to come from a subpoena. Therefore, he's doing it because he's under duress. Maybe the duress is what gives Cipollone the opportunity to speak out. Because here, by the way, he came down on the right side on all of these questions, urging Trump not to break the law.
No, I think you could be right. We just don't know what tack Cipollone's going to take. Paul may be 100% right that Cipollone is going to want to look as though he's a loyalist to Donald Trump. On the other hand, he does come across from the testimony as being the person in the room that is basically telling Donald Trump not to commit any crimes. And he does come across as somebody who is on the right side on all of these issues. So you're right. A lot of times witnesses will come in only with a subpoena so that it doesn't appear as though they're bending over backwards to cooperate. I mean, he really has no basis to fight the subpoena. He has no attorney-client privilege with Donald Trump. There is no attorney-client privilege for the office of the White House counsel. He represents the institution, not the individual. Trump certainly doesn't have any kind of executive privilege here because executive privilege just doesn't apply to criminal activity. I mean, that issue was resolved in 1974 in U.S. v. Nixon by the Supreme Court. So, yeah, he could wind up deciding, I'm going to take the subpoena, I have no choice, and be forced to testify. You could be 100% right. Paul could also be right, and we'll just have to see what happens.
We'll have to see what happens. You know, but meanwhile, Peter, I just want to remind people of what in real time Pat Cipollone was hearing and what he was understanding to be taking place. This is some of the video. This was some of the sort of video audio bits that were played during this most recent hearing. It's damning stuff. It was clear there were people perched in trees with AR-15s. Take a listen to a little bit of this.
White males, brown cowboy boots. They had Glock-style pistols in their waistband.
8736 with the message that subject, weapon on his right hip. Copy that, he's in the tree.
Motor 1, make sure PPD knows they have an elevated threat in the tree south side of Constitution Avenue. Look for the Don't Tread on Me flag, American flag face mask, cowboy boots, weapon on the right side hip.
I got 3 men walking down the street in fatigue while carrying AR-15. Copy at 14th and Independent.
Peter, from your law enforcement experience, can you think of any reason why any White House security detail, Secret Service, why any chief of staff would allow the president of the United States to be essentially accompanied by and mix in with people who were armed the way you just heard described, and then be allowed to go to the Capitol after having demanded that the armed people be allowed to go to?
Well, Joy, I can't imagine a more difficult domestic security setting than a roundup mob where there are reports of people in trees with semi-automatic long guns, and you've got the President of the United States who's whipping that crowd into a frenzy along with other folks, then demanding to march with them down to the Capitol. And what's interesting, when you look at the President's statements that came out in the hearing, that he allegedly said, he didn't say, they're not here to hurt anyone. He said, they're not here to hurt me. So when you think about that and you break it down, and this, of course, was in the context of him trying to get the Secret Service to remove the magnetometers to allow greater crowds to come in because it would be a better shot on TV. But I'm continually stunned that there was not far more bloodshed on January 6th than occurred. And the more that this information comes out, this stunning footage of people in trees where people in law enforcement are saying, we've got folks with AR-15s, with long guns, with other, not clubs, not flagpoles, not stakes or canes, but actual semi-automatic rifles. That's an extraordinarily dangerous situation. And again, I think we're blessed that there was not far more bloodshed than we saw. And it just highlights how close we all were on January 6th to extraordinary violence.